Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm excited to kick off today's presentation with our first slide, titled Popular Struggles and Movements. Today, we're going to explore some of the most impactful social struggles and movements throughout history. We'll look at their origins, their significance, and how they've shaped our world. So let's get started and dive into this fascinating topic together. Let's explore how different groups influence politics. Starting with interest groups, these are organized groups that seek to shape policies in favor of their interests. Moving on, we have movement groups, which are more spontaneous and often driven by collective action around a cause. Next, we consider mobilization and organizations. These are the mechanisms through which groups activate support and coordinate efforts. Then, we ask ourselves, is their influence healthy? It's an important question, as influence can be both positive and negative depending on how it's used. We also look at public interest groups, which aim to serve the broader good rather than specific sectional interests. Speaking of sectional interests, these groups focus on specific segments of society, like business or labor groups, representing narrow interests. Now, it's crucial to understand how interest groups and movements impact democracy and popular struggles. They can empower citizens, but they can also challenge democratic processes if not managed properly. Finally, we compare popular struggles in countries like Nepal and Bolivia, which show how grassroots movements can significantly influence political change. All these points connect to the larger theme of how civic participation and organized groups shape political life and decision-making processes. Let's look at Nepal and understand the key struggles they faced. King Jainendra, who became the new king of Nepal, was not willing to accept democratic rule. He took advantage of the weakness and unpopularity of the elected government. In February 2005, he dismissed the prime minister and dissolved the parliament that was elected by the people. This move sparked a significant movement in April 2006, aimed at regaining control over the government from the king. Nepal then witnessed an extraordinary popular movement in April 2006. The main goal of this movement was to restore democracy. While the king officially remained the head of state, real power was actually exercised by elected representatives. It's also important to remember that King Birendra, who had accepted the transition from absolute monarchy to a constitutional monarchy, was tragically killed in a mysterious massacre of the royal family. These events highlight how popular struggles can challenge even the most entrenched power structures, illustrating the broader theme of people fighting for democracy and their rights. The restored parliament met and took a significant step forward by passing laws that reduced most of the king's powers. This was a crucial move towards establishing democracy in Nepal. Meanwhile, the SPA and the Maoists reached an understanding on how the new Constituent Assembly would be elected, marking an important phase in the democratic process. This entire struggle is often called Nepal's second movement for democracy, and it's important to recognize how inspiring the Nepali people's fight for freedom has been, serving as a beacon for democrats worldwide. The leaders involved in this movement rejected the half-hearted concessions the king offered. They remained firm on their demands: the restoration of parliament, the formation of an all-party government, and the election of a new constituent assembly. On April 24, 2006, which was the deadline for their ultimatum, the king was finally compelled to agree to all three demands. Following this, the SPA appointed Girija Prasad Koirala as the new prime minister of the interim government. All major political parties in Nepal united into what's called the Seven-Party Alliance, or SPA. They organized a 4-day strike in Kathmandu, but what started as a protest soon turned into an indefinite strike. Maoist insurgents and various other organizations joined hands with the movement, amplifying the pressure. People defied curfews, took to the streets, and showed immense courage. By April 21st, the protesters numbered between 3 to 5 lakhs, an extraordinary show of unity and determination, and they issued an ultimatum to the king. This protest movement was a powerful display of the Nepali people's resolve to achieve democracy. It demonstrated how collective action and steadfast demands can bring about real change, even in the face of authoritarian resistance. In January 2000, a coalition of labor leaders, human rights activists, and community organizers came together to organize a 4-day general strike right in the heart of the city. This was a powerful show of unity and determination. The government responded by agreeing to sit down and negotiate, and so the strike was called off. But unfortunately, nothing much changed afterward. The police then resorted to brutal repression, which only intensified the unrest, leading to renewed agitation in February. By April, another strike had erupted, and this time the government responded by imposing martial law. Despite these harsh measures, the people's resilience was remarkable. Ultimately, the pressure and the collective power of the people forced the multinational corporations' officials to flee the city, and the government was compelled to concede all the protesters' demands. This story highlights the incredible strength of community action and the importance of standing united against unjust policies. Now, shifting gears a bit, Bolivia is a very poor country in Latin America. The World Bank exerted pressure on the government to privatize municipal water supplies. They sold these rights for Cochabamba to a multinational company. Almost immediately, the company increased water prices by 4 times. Imagine that many people were now paying around Rs. 1,000 a month, even though the average income is only about Rs. 5,000. This sudden hike made water unaffordable for a lot of families, sparking spontaneous protests across the city. This whole situation is what became known as the Bolivia Water War, and it's a powerful example of how economic policies and corporate interests can directly impact people's lives. It also underscores the importance of community resistance in defending basic rights like access to water. So, when we look at the movements in Nepal and Bolivia, we see 2 different stories of struggle. In Nepal, the movement was primarily focused on establishing democracy itself. It was about building the foundation for how the country would be governed moving forward. On the other hand, in Bolivia, the struggle was centered around defending an elected democratic government. It was more about protecting a specific government that was already in place and ensuring its policies could continue. The Bolivia movement was about a particular policy or set of policies, while the Nepal movement was broader, aiming to reshape the very political system of the country. Both were successful in their goals, but their impacts played out at different levels. Nepal's success helped set the stage for long-term democratic development, whereas Bolivia's victory was more about safeguarding a specific government and its policies at that moment. Understanding these differences helps us see how various struggles for democracy can take different forms depending on the context and what's at stake. Democracy is a dynamic process that evolves through popular struggles. While it's true that sometimes decisions can be reached through consensus without any conflict, that's actually quite rare. Most of the time, democratic conflict is resolved through mass mobilization. Both of these scenarios, whether consensus or conflict, are part of the broader picture of political struggle. In many cases, it's the mass support, like public demonstrations, that ultimately decides the outcome. These struggles highlight the critical role of political organization in mobilizing people and shaping decisions. So, the key takeaway here is that democracy's evolution heavily depends on active participation and collective action. Whether through peaceful consensus or through mass mobilization during conflicts, it's the people's involvement that drives democratic change. This connects to our overall theme. Democracy isn't just about voting, it's about ongoing engagement and struggle. The struggle in Nepal was not just driven by political parties alone. In fact, it involved a wide range of organizations coming together to support the movement. All the major labor unions and their federations played a crucial role, mobilizing workers and advocating for change. But it didn't stop there. Organizations representing indigenous people, teachers, lawyers, and human rights groups also extended their support. This broad coalition of diverse groups highlights how the movement was truly a collective effort, uniting different sectors of society. It shows how various organizations can come together for a common cause, reinforcing the theme that successful mobilization often requires broad-based support across different communities. In a democracy, the process of creating change often involves parties contesting elections and forming governments. But it's important to remember that not every citizen participates in politics in this direct way. Some people may want to get involved, or feel they need to, or simply have the skills to take part in political activities beyond just voting. This direct participation influences how decisions are made in a democracy. It's through these various forms of involvement that citizens can shape policies and impact society. From these examples, we see that many different organizations work behind the scenes during major struggles or issues. These organizations play diverse roles to support or oppose policies. For instance, let's look at the protest against water privatization in Bolivia. Interestingly, it wasn't led by any political party. Instead, a group called FEDCOR took the lead. This organization included local professionals like engineers and environmentalists. They were supported by a federation of farmers who depended on irrigation, factory workers' unions, middle-class students from the University of Cochabamba, and even homeless street children in the city. The movement also received backing from the Socialist Party. This example highlights how a variety of groups, professionals, workers, students, and even marginalized populations, can come together to influence important issues. It shows that in a democracy, change often comes from the collective effort of many different organizations working behind the scenes, each contributing in their own way. Pressure groups are organizations that try to influence government policies. Unlike political parties, they don't aim to control or share political power directly. Instead, their focus is on shaping decisions and advocating for specific interests. These groups are usually formed when people with common interests, occupations, aspirations, or opinions come together to achieve a shared goal. They play a vital role in the political landscape by giving a voice to different segments of society and ensuring that diverse interests are considered in policymaking. This connects to our overall theme of understanding how various actors influence government and policy outcomes. A movement, in this context, is a type of political actor that aims to influence politics from the outside, rather than participating directly in electoral competitions. Unlike pressure groups, which often have more formal and structured organizations, movements tend to be much looser in their organization. This means that their decision-making processes are generally more flexible and informal, allowing for quick adaptation to changing circumstances. They rely heavily on spontaneous participation, meaning that anyone who feels motivated can join in at any time, rather than following a strict hierarchy or set of rules. This spontaneous, grassroots nature often makes movements more dynamic and responsive to public sentiment, which connects to the overall theme of how different political actors operate within the political landscape. Let's take a closer look at some of the key social movements that have shaped our society. First, we have the environmental movement, which is focused on protecting our natural surroundings and promoting sustainable practices. Then, there's the women's movement, which has been instrumental in fighting for gender equality and women's rights. The Right to Information movement emphasizes the importance of transparency and the public's access to government information, empowering citizens to participate more actively in governance. Moving on, the anti-liquor movement aims to curb alcohol consumption due to its social and health impacts. The Nirmata Bakau Andolan is a notable movement that protests against large dam projects that displace local communities and harm the environment. These examples illustrate how various movements mobilize people around important issues, driving change and raising awareness. They all highlight the power of collective action in shaping a better society. Usually, interest groups are formed with the goal of promoting the interests of a specific section or group within society. For example, we have trade unions, business associations, and professional bodies like lawyers, doctors, and teachers. These groups are considered sectional because they represent a particular section of society, such as workers, employees, business owners, or even followers of a specific religion or caste. Their main focus is on the well-being and betterment of their own members. It's important to understand that, unlike other groups that might aim for broader societal change, sectional interest groups prioritize the interests of their members first and foremost. This distinction helps us see how different groups influence policies and decisions based on their specific needs and concerns. Connecting this to our overall theme, it shows how various segments within society seek to protect and advance their own interests through organized efforts. Some organizations, especially public interest groups, are not focused on representing just one section of society. Instead, they aim to defend broader or more general interests that benefit the public as a whole. What's interesting is that the members of these groups might not personally benefit from the cause they support. Their goal is to promote collective good rather than just the interests of a specific subset. They often work to help groups beyond their own membership, which highlights their broader focus. In some cases, the activities they undertake can actually benefit the members directly, but their primary purpose remains serving the wider community. This approach ties into the overall theme of how different organizations influence society, showing that some advocate for causes that transcend individual or group interests and aim for the common good. Some social movements are long-term and involve multiple issues. These movements often don't have a single organization or leader guiding them. For example, the environmental movement is more like a broad label for many different organizations and issue-specific movements. Each of these groups tends to be independent, with their own leadership and sometimes even differing views on policies. Yet, despite these differences, they all share a common broad goal and generally approach their work similarly. On the other hand, most movements are issue-specific. They focus on achieving a single objective within a limited time frame. These movements usually have clear leadership and some organizational structure. Their active phase tends to be relatively short. For instance, the Nepalese movement and the Nirmata Bhakau Andolan are examples of issue-specific movements. So in the bigger picture, movements can be long-term and broad, or short-term and focused. Both play important roles in shaping social change, depending on their goals and scope. Workers' organizations, employees' associations, and most of the movement groups often resort to various tactics to make their voices heard. They do this to pressure the government into paying attention to their demands. One common strategy is to try and gain public support and sympathy for their goals and activities. They do this through information campaigns, organizing meetings, and filing petitions. Most groups also try to influence the media to give more attention to their issues, understanding how powerful media coverage can be in shaping public opinion. Additionally, they often organize protest activities like strikes or disruptions of government programs to draw attention and demonstrate their seriousness. All of these tactics are aimed at influencing politics by shaping public opinion and putting pressure on policymakers. Essentially, they use a combination of public engagement and direct action to push their agendas and try to sway political decisions in their favor. This connects to the overall theme of how different groups mobilize to affect change within the political system. Let's talk about how pressure groups are often connected to political parties. In some cases, these groups are formed or led by leaders of political parties themselves, or they function as an extended arm of the party. For example, many trade unions and student organizations in India are either established by or affiliated with a specific political party. Typically, the leaders of these pressure groups are also active members or leaders within the party, which helps create a close link between the two. Now, moving on to interest groups and movements, they usually don't directly participate in party politics. Instead, their goal is to influence political parties from the outside. They often take clear political stances and have their own ideologies and positions on major issues, even though they are not political parties themselves. It's important to understand that the relationship between political parties and these interest groups can vary. Sometimes it's a direct relationship, with close ties and formal links, and other times it's more indirect, with influence exerted through advocacy and lobbying. This dynamic relationship is a key part of how interest groups shape political processes and policies, which ties back to our overall theme of understanding the various ways in which different organizations impact politics. So here's an interesting point. The government actually gets to hear about what different sections of the population want. This creates a kind of rough balance of power, helping to accommodate conflicting interests. It's an important part of how democracy works, ensuring that no one group dominates completely. Public interest groups and social movements play a crucial role here. They act as a counterbalance, reminding the government of the needs and concerns of ordinary citizens. Even sectional interest groups, which represent specific segments of society, are valuable because they keep the process balanced. When multiple groups are active, no single group can gain absolute dominance over society. If one group pressures the government to favor its interests, another will push back to counteract that influence. This dynamic actually deepens democracy. Pressuring the government isn't inherently unhealthy. It's part of how democratic systems function, as long as everyone has the opportunity to do so. Of course, there's a risk that small, powerful groups with lots of money can exert undue influence, sometimes overshadowing the broader public opinion. They might hijack public discussions to push narrow agendas that don't reflect the will of the majority. Some might argue that groups promoting specific sectional interests shouldn't have much influence in democracy, since a healthy democracy is supposed to serve all citizens equally. There's also a concern that these groups wield power without direct accountability. Unlike political parties, which face the voters in elections, these groups are not directly answerable to the people. So the key question is their influence healthy? On the one hand, pressure groups can strengthen democracy by ensuring diverse voices are heard. On the other hand, if they operate with disproportionate power or without responsibility, it can threaten the fairness and inclusiveness of the democratic process. It's a complex balance we need to consider carefully.